I feel awkward. I don't know how to react. I want to back off. I don't want to touch. I don't want to say the wrong thing. And especially with dementia, we feel that because the behaviors are odd, they're weird, they can be very off-putting. And so I think sometimes we step back and just don't engage because we're afraid. It's okay to engage. It's even okay to laugh. And sometimes by laughing, we can help people get a perspective. And obviously I mean to use wisdom with that. But in that particular situation, God really used that laughter to do a work. Well, in thinking about perspective, that leads me to the second gift, and that is the gift of truth. I call that the necessary gift. There's so many scriptures about truth. Proverbs 23:23, buy the truth and do not sell it. Also, wisdom, instruction, and understanding. You know, humans resist truth, don't they? How many of y'all been to a Carolina Panthers game? Anybody? Yeah, a lot of you. I had a chance to go to one in the fall, and I was with these other couples that I didn't know very well, and with Mark, and then all this whole row in front of us of all the Jersey people with the blue face paint, and they're just all, you know, the really maniacal fans. Well, what this group did not know, my father was a high school football coach, so I spent every Friday night of my childhood going to high school football games, so I actually do know what is happening in the games. Well, in this game, it was the game Luke Kuechly got hurt, if you remember that game. In this game, someone made a long run, and then the yellow flag went down. And I immediately said, blocking the back, it's coming back. And they all looked at me like, shut up. And so then they put it up on the big screen, and you can see the block in the back. And I said, block in the back, it's coming back. Well, at that point, all the row of jerseys turned and glared at me. And I thought, you know, they don't want to hear this truth right now. I just don't believe. And they did not. They wanted to boo. They wanted to hiss. They wanted to get the emotion out. They didn't care what the truth was. The touchdown came back. That was all they cared about. And I tell that little story to just say, humans resist truth. People who get any kind of terminal diagnosis in their family have vastly different reactions. And unfortunately, in many cases, the initial reaction at least is denial, resistance to the diagnosis, feeling like there's going to be some easy answer, feeling like I can talk mama out of it if I just correct her enough. So I think a big part of our role in ministering to family caregivers is an ongoing assistance, helping them face the truth of what is, where you are, and what's coming. And that has a lot of impacts. Some of the truth that we have to face has to do with end-of-life decisions. We have to help people understand at the end of life with a terminal illness, your loved one's going to be incapacitated. If you're the family caregiver, if you're the healthcare power of attorney, you're going to have to be able to advocate for whatever their end of life decision is, and you need to understand it. You need to be comfortable with it. Truth is also protection. I was thinking about this in Psalm 91:4. Psalm 91 is a very famous passage of scripture. He shall cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you shall take refuge. His truth shall be your shield and buckler. I want you to visualize that. His truth shall be your shield. Ephesians 6:14 is the same idea in the New Testament. Stand therefore, having girded your waist with truth. Truth is the first piece of God's armor mentioned in that very famous Ephesians 6 passage. And it's again this image that we're girded so that we can stand. And when I thought about that as the caregiver, some days you're just so weighed down. Some days you're just so tired. People don't sleep through the night. They get up and wonder, all these things. Some days you're so annoyed. It's like Chinese water torture, hearing the same thing over and over all day long, the same question, the same anxiety. You need the truth as protection. And I want to share with you what I think are the three voices that the family caregiver hears. I want you to think about this from the perspective of ministry. What is truth that can be shared that can help them? First of all, there's the truth of what they hear from their loved one. I already told you the first time my mom forgot who I was. Eventually, she totally forgot who I was. I think she always knew that she liked me, but she never really knew who I was. Some people are hearing really ugly things from their mama, their daddy, their spouse. Can you imagine how much that must hurt when your spouse wakes up and screams because they don't know the stranger in the bed anymore? One of my good friends' father just died. He had dementia. Her mother one night had to hide in a closet because her father became so belligerent. So you're hearing horrible things sometimes from the one you're taking care of. But then the one that I thought was really the worst was the things you hear from other people. The things you hear from misinformed people at church. And so I think in ministry, we can go a long way if we help people understand the truth of this disease. I would always take Mom to church as long as I could, and I would invariably go in, and I would always see the same two people every Sunday, and they would always give me same opposite viewpoints. And one was an older man who's very active. He's in his 90s, but he's very active. And I'd be standing there right with my mom, and he would come up to me, and he'd say, "How much longer are you going to put up with this?" And he would talk to Mark all the time. It's time for her to be in a facility. It's time for her to be in a facility. I'm sorry, that's no one's decision but me and my family. But then I'd go to Sunday school where I had this loving, most godly, sweet Sunday school teacher. And he would usually not say it to me. He would usually sort of preach it as a prayer and say something like, "Thank you, Lord, for these people, so wonderful, kind, generous, and Christ-like, even taking their own parents into their own homes." And it would be so specific, I would always know that it was for me. So here I am. I have my own life that I already had. I have this person who is severely impaired living in my home. She can't find her way around my home. She has to be supervised at all times. I have to give her a bath. Sometimes I have to wipe her bottom. All these things are going on. And I'm hearing these different things. You also have a category of people that is the worst, in my opinion, that I never dealt with. But the people who, they don't want to face the fact that the human brain can fail. And they cannot separate the brain, the thought process, the cognitive process, and the personality from the spiritual, eternal soul. So I taught my breakout class a new word for dementia or Alzheimer's. It's the word that's now coming into fashion, brain failure. And if you're in ministry, it would be a really good thing for you to start using that word. We go in Sunday school, we pray for people with heart failure. We go in Sunday school or prayer meeting, we pray for people with kidney failure. Then we look at the person with brain failure who's acting out, acting weird, acting odd, and we just shake our heads and go, well, there just must be something spiritual. It's just got to be spiritual. It's just got to be spiritual. Does it? The brain is an organ. The brain can fail. I think that one truth alone, advocated from a pulpit, could help so many people who are going through this issue. And so I say it, this sounds harsh, but, let's get out of the dark ages. If your heart can fail, your brain can fail. Your kidneys can fail, your brain can fail. Your liver can fail, your brain can fail. I had not been here 10 minutes. Two people, this is a story I heard. People are saying my dad's taking up drinking because of his behavior. They talk about him. They say he's a drunk. Second story. People think my husband's having an affair because of his strange behavior. That is incredibly hurtful. But we have truth as that protection from that. And truth tells us this is a disease. Their brain is shrinking. Their brain is dying. They do have an eternal soul that is untouched, and at death it will depart and go to be with Christ. But many things about them will change as the brain is failing. And I think just that knowledge alone is a big shield for those darts that will come. Next thing as far as truth goes is truth is not only protection, but truth helps us in reflection. I think I mentioned this verse a minute ago. Psalm 51:6, one of my favorite verses of all the Bible. Behold, you desire truth in the inward parts, and in the hidden part you will make me to know wisdom. I tell it to people like this: God can handle your truth. If a loved one gets a terminal diagnosis of any type, but I think particularly with dementia, the grieving process starts before death. You grieve for what the person is losing. You grieve for what you're losing. I remember so vividly on one particular day, not long after my mom came to live with me, her living with me also coincided with me losing my dad, one of the world's greatest people, whether he was my dad or not. And one day I was in the kitchen, we were kind of cleaning up, and we would always listen to a lot of music. And they had a CD of all these old Broadway kind of songs that they had liked to listen to, so I put it on. And this song came on. It's a song by Rodgers and Hammerstein. It's from the musical South Pacific, if you know your musicals. And it's called Some Enchanted Evening. Anybody ever heard that song? It is a beautiful song. Some enchanted evening. You're going to look across a crowded room. You're going to find your true love. Well, when that song started playing, I'm looking at my mom. I think I was drying a dish or something. She was at the table coloring, which was one of her favorite hobbies when she got a little deeper into the disease. And it made me think of a story they always told about how they met. My parents were both children of mill workers, and so they were not wealthy. They both had worked for 3 years after high school before they entered college. So they were both freshmen at age 20, 21 at Gardner-Webb College, Good Baptist School, when it was a 2-year school. And they always told the story of how my dad looked across the cafeteria line and saw my mom and knew that she was beautiful, and he wanted to ask her out. And then they would tell 2 different versions of the story, because you know how that is between husbands and wives. And we would all laugh about it. So I hear that song, and I remember that story, and I look at her coloring, and I was just heartbroken, primarily for her. She was just in her early mid-70s, but she wasn't going to be able to start over with any kind of a new life as a widow. She wasn't even really able to grieve and appreciate what she had lost with my dad. And I think that was the forgetting that hurt me the most, was her forgetting my dad. Because I wanted to see her grieving. I wanted to know that she knew, what we had lost. So that was very, very, very painful. But in reflecting, God can take that and he can work with us. I was sitting at the table with someone, and she was talking about grief being work. Julia Pope, she leads Grief Share. Grief is work, and it's work that really requires us to call out to God. And I think for the whole journey of caregiving, there's all different kinds of griefs. That was one kind that I was experiencing that day. There's another kind when you lose the loved one at the end. But God can handle that. He desires truth in the inward places. He can handle it when I had to come to him and just scream almost and say, I can't take it. I can't do it. It's too hard. And I want to ask you, as a minister to a caregiver, to realize there's so many people out there having that experience. No one at my church would have known that I was having that experience, because I went to church, I smiled, I got my mom clean, I got her dressed, we did the best we could, we did great, we did fine. We need folks in our churches who can be the friend, the pastor, the counselor, to all the people on this caregiving journey, that can say to them, it's okay. You don't have to act like you don't feel this way. God can handle it. Tell him. I can handle it. Tell me. And they will hold that in confidence, and they will cherish the opportunity to be let in that closely to another person. So truth is protection. Truth is part of reflection. And I think another part of reflecting on the truth is, and I don't think I fully appreciated this till the end of the journey, but as a person is on this journey of caregiving, God is doing a sanctifying work in that person, in the caregiver. He is glorifying himself through that caregiving, and it will be rewarded. And I think in today's postmodern world, and Alan talked about this a little bit, how the world has changed, we almost don't connect the dots anymore. God really does see. He really does know. He is watching, and he rewards us for our faithfulness, if not in this life, in the life to come. There's a great verse, is Hebrews 6:10 through 12. For God is not unjust to forget your work. That phrase is so packed. A just God cannot forget your caregiving. A just God cannot forget what you have done for his kingdom and for his people and for others in his name. For God is not unjust to forget your work and labor of love, which you have shown toward his name, in that you have ministered to the saints and do minister. And we desire that each one of you show the same diligence to the full assurance of hope until the end. The hope at the end. And it's a long journey to the end. Let me finish the verse and I want to go back to that. That you do not become sluggish, but imitate those who through faith and patience inherit the promises. What a great eternal truth to share with the people in your church who are on the journey of caregiving. There is an end coming. You are going to get through this experience, and God is going to remember it and reward you through it, and he is sanctifying you through that process. There's a great story that I love about the Vietnam War, and it's about Admiral, I think his name is James Stockdale. He was captured and he was imprisoned in what they called the Hanoi Hilton there in North Vietnam. And after being in there for years, you may know the stories, the prisoners figured out a code by which they could communicate with one another so they wouldn't feel so isolated and alone. When he was released and came back to the United States, he would later explain people's experience in that awful, awful situation as prisoners of war. Far worse than anything I went through as a caregiver. And he said there were two kinds of people who died of despair. The first kind were the people who thought they would get out tomorrow. And as time went on and they didn't get out, they gave up. They gave up hope and they quit. The second kind were the people who thought they would never get out. And if they thought there was not an end, if they thought there was no hope for a different situation, they would give up. And I think that story is very appropriate because truly Alzheimer's and caregiving for Alzheimer's is a years-long experience. My mother was 14 years from diagnosis to death. Keeping in mind she was at the end of stage 1 of 3 at diagnosis. And that is very common. Sometimes people lie for 3 or 4 years, completely incapacitated. Imagine if that's your spouse. So I think we have to help people see this journey will have an end. It will have an end of heaven for your loved one. It will have an end for you. But God will be glorified in the midst of that. The last thing I want to share about truth goes along with that idea. Recently, we had a service on Good Friday, and I don't know why this had never really jumped out at me, but it hadn't. And it did that night. It's Jesus at the Last Supper from the book of John. In John chapter, hold on, I thought I had the right chapter. Let me get to it. 13. Let me look back at my notes. John chapter 13. In John chapter 13, it starts in verse 18, where Jesus is about to send Judas out to betray him. In verse 26, Jesus says, "It's he who's going to betray me, to whom I shall give a piece of bread when I have dipped it." And it says that when he gave it to Simon, to Judas, that Satan entered him. That jumped out at me. Not a demon, not badness, not evil, not human flesh. Satan entered him. And then very, very poetically, at the end of this passage, God inspired John to write this sentence, "And it was night." And I just thought about that evening, and I thought of my home, and I thought of my big farm table where my life group comes over and they have chili. And for some reason, I just, in that moment, had an extra ability to envision myself there. And I thought, what if I was sitting around my farm table and had all the people in my life group that are some of my closest church friends, and I knew that when I handed this piece of cornbread off to one of them, Satan was going to enter them. They would literally be possessed by Satan. And I knew that they were going to then go out and sell me for money to kill me. And then I got ready to walk outside to go to the garden to pray, and it was night. And I already knew it was going to be the darkest, blackest night of my life in every way. But here's the amazing part. Look at verse 31 if you're over there. This is John chapter 13, verse 31. "So when he had gone out," that's talking about Jesus. This is at the moment, at the table. Satan's just entered one of his 12 closest friends, and he's left. "So when he had gone out, Jesus said, 'Now the Son of Man is glorified.'" Not he's glorified. Now the Son of Man is glorified. And God is glorified in him. And just the profound nature of that hit me. Jesus' ability as God to never, ever, ever fail to look at a situation eternally. That is amazing. Your best friend, you just handed her the bread. She's becoming demon possessed. She's going out. It's night. You're about to go to the garden. You know you're going to be dead in less than 24 hours. Yet you say, "Now God is glorified in me." And I think that's something, because we all don't always have that eternal perspective, that you can share with people on that caregiver journey. "Hey, I know it's hard, but I see God working in you. I see God glorified in you." That would do so much to lift somebody up who's on that day-to-day journey of taking care of a loved one. Well, the final gift is the gift of love. And I want to tell you a story about that and how God brought that home to me. Not much longer after my mom had come to live with me, we had a very bittersweet moment. I told y'all my dad was a football coach. Well, some of his players had decided they wanted to endow a scholarship at Gardner-Webb University that would be named for him, and it would go to a student at our high school, Kings Mountain High School. So, unfortunately, my dad had died before it was fully endowed, but then within about a year and a half after his death, they did get the scholarship completed. So my mom and I had been invited to this ceremony. So I wanted her to go. So we came in this auditorium, and of course, it's back to my hometown. I have all these memories, childhood memories. We're sitting on the front row, and this conversation is just going in an endless loop, and this is my mom's conversation. "Do you think I need a slip? Am I going to have to go up on stage, and is the light going to shine through my dress?" "No, Mom, I think you're fine. It's really not that bright of a spotlight." "Well, do you think I'm going to need to say anything?" "No, Mom, they've told us you're not going to need to say anything because they're going to say everything. We're just going to stand there and smile, and we're going to shake the young man's hand when he comes across the stage." "Well, you know, if I need to say something, I did win the Lincolnton High School Declamation Contest of 1948. "Yes, Mom, I know you won the Lincolnton Declamation Contest of 1948. literally, it was a loop. As soon as we finished declamation, she'd circle back around. Do you think I need a slip-on? So we're sitting there, and this loop is going. I'm using my gift of laughter. I'm not really getting upset. We all stand up to sing the national anthem, and that's just when I just fell apart. I just started boo-hooing. And so we went through the ceremony and did our part, and she walked up on stage, and she smiled, and she shook hands, and God love her, she could just pull that off, and you'd never know anything was wrong with her. We go back to our seats, and then they started giving out all their scholarships. This was like an awards night, and so it was the first time my dad's was included. So they're giving out their scholarships, and I was so proud of my little hometown of Kings Mountain, North Carolina. Everybody had a scholarship. There was a barber shop that had a scholarship that they were giving out. There was the Arts Council, I think, a local group. They were giving out a scholarship. Well, it came down near the end, and this young African-American man, looked like he was about 16 or 17, he stood up. He was dressed to the nines. He had on a gold-colored suit. He came up onto the podium, and I saw that he had a large pin on with a picture of a little girl. And I thought, what is this about? So I opened my program, and I saw his name, and his scholarship was named the Aisha Degree Scholarship. And at that point, it hit me who this was. This was the family of a girl who was abducted in Shelby, North Carolina at age 8. In the year that we were at this ceremony, she should have been graduating from high school. No body has ever been found, but they did find her book bag out in the woods a little distance from the home. I recently heard they do think they have maybe some new leads in this case. This young man who took the podium, had the picture of her, was her brother, 1 or 2 years younger. And he spoke so beautifully and so eloquently about the family wanting to keep her memory alive, wanting to bring something good out of this darkness. And so they were giving a scholarship to a student from what would have been her high school to a senior that would have been in her graduating class. And when I went home, I thought about that, and I mean, I just don't know that there's much worse that any of us can imagine. And I thought, how do you take that kind of pain? There's not even a body. It's a pain that never dies and it never closes. And you just think it's just got to knock that mother to her knees. I mean, how do you take that? And how do you plow that over into good for someone else? And I thought, that is just the picture of God. That is just the picture of the gospel, that in the darkest, darkest, darkest evil, somehow love does something good. And I just came away with that, first of all, convicted. And I think this is a truth that we can sometimes share too, that the situation we're walking through is probably not the worst situation that anybody's ever experienced. Let's be honest. And I think it takes a lot of discernment to know when to encourage and when to confront. So the Lord bless y'all as you do that. I can't give you the answer to that. But I thought, man, what love, what a beautiful picture of the gospel, going forth. So similar, made me think of Romans 5:8. But God demonstrated his love for us in this: while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. God sent that love into the midst of darkness. He didn't wait for us to clean up. So I kind of wrote a little journal entry about a day or two after that, and I had written that I thought love was going to be the thing that was going to see me through this journey. And that I was going to have to remember that when I was gagging in the bathroom. And I was going to have to remember that when I was getting annoyed. And I was going to have to remember that when I was losing sleep and life was getting hard. And so I would often try to reflect on that. My parents also had a great love. Kind of want to leave you with this. There's two pictures that I have of my parents. One is a physical picture. One is only in my mind. The physical picture is my parents right after they got married. They're standing in front of a new car. They're so proud of themselves. They've worked for 3 years. They've earned their money for college. They're paying for their own school. They got married after their first year at Gardner Webb, keeping in mind they were 21 when they started. And my mom was just so pretty. I should have put a picture of her on the screen. She just looks like a little 1950s, little perfect little like Debbie Reynolds or something. And my dad is just tall and he's handsome, and they're just everything that's young and beautiful and wonderful in the world's eyes in this pretty black and white picture. But one of the last pictures I have of them in the world's eyes is not quite so beautiful. Physically, my dad has lost a leg. He kind of had what was called hospital dementia. He had not quite come out of that, so he was a little confused, not knowing what was going on. He was having swallowing issues, so we were having to puree his food, and he didn't like the food in rehab, so we had made him this Brunswick stew, and then we had pureed it. We took him over there. I was trying to get my mom to look pretty when we go see my dad, but she had pitched a fit, so she had on the blue T-shirt and the blue windbreaker that she always wanted to wear. And I don't remember, maybe it was one too many battles, but I don't think I could get her to wash her hair. And, you know, that's a major battle. So her hair was a little stringy. And I was just kind of standing back, and they were sitting on the bed. But she was trying to feed him that Brunswick stew. And I thought, you know, that's not near as outwardly beautiful a picture as that 1953 picture in front of that slick car when they look gorgeous. But it's just as beautiful a picture of love, isn't it? With her limited abilities, she never stopped being concerned. Was my dad warm enough? Was he fed enough? Of course, she forgot that I had fed her lunch right before we went, so she would give him a bite, and then she would take a bite. But that was okay because he didn't really want to eat. So love is the glue that holds the journey together. I'll say it like that. Maybe if truth is the necessary piece of the journey to be able to deal with it, love is the glue that holds it all together. Well, my mom and her journey came to an end in November of 2015, November 1st. I liked how my sister put it. Billy Bates was not going to come back for her on Halloween. She had to make it to November 1st because Billy Bates was too godly to come take her by the hand on Halloween. That's figurative. We all have good theology. Don't judge me on that. But my mom, God answered a major prayer for me. He may not answer it for you. He may not be answering every prayer of everyone in your church because he has his plan. It's not up to us to say that. But I'd pray that she would go before she became completely bedridden. And that's what happened. At the time that she passed, until a week before her death, she could walk and she could eat. She had basically no verbal skills left. In some ways, you would think she didn't have a great quality of life, but in many ways, she still did. She still laughed. Her eyes could still light up. She would talk. It sounded like nonsense, but she knew what she was saying, and we would share together. We had some notice that she was going down, and hospice came in a week before her death, and I just can't say enough wonderful things about that organization. I think they had a table or they had a representative. Hospice is the only way to go, I think, for end of life. And if your congregation, if someone's keeping a loved one at home, that can be a way that you can help them, is to let them know they need to make sure they're working with their physician on hospice care, because it changes everything. It changes the financial picture. It just changes so many things that I don't even have time to go into. But anyway, hospice was wonderful. They came out to my house. They were so concerned about her that she was deteriorating just so quickly. They wanted to sign the papers on a Saturday night. And this lady from hospice came to my house on a Saturday night, and we signed her into hospice care. She was in a memory care facility where she could stay until end of life, so hospice could come in there. So for the next week, hospice came in. My sister and my brother came. We sang hymns around her bed. It was very sweet. The morning that she actually passed, my sister was trying to get back after just needing to go home. She's younger than I am. She still had a child in middle school at the year that my mom died. So I was the only one there. And